My daughter handled the basement renovation while I was still grieving in Australia. And by the time I arrived in Toronto, the $3,100 I had spent was already gone, nothing was said. And my place in the family quietly shifted before I even understood it. Follow my story until the end. And comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story has reached. I arrived on an early morning flight, the city still gray from winter melting into spring. My suitcase rattled. As I moved through the arrival hall, I carried documents and receipts for every detail of the basement renovation funded from my savings. The taxi ride to my daughter's house was quiet. I tried to focus on familiar streets, old parks we had visited on previous trips. Yet every sign of the city felt distant, as though I were seeing it through a window at the house. My daughter hugged me quickly, one arm around me, her other hand scrolling through her phone. She led me inside, talking about how the basement looked now, how she had painted the walls, moved the old sofa into a corner, installed the light fixtures. I nodded, pretending the changes were comforting, even though the tiles I had chosen, the cabinet I had paid for, were now altered or hidden. The $3,100 I had spent seemed irrelevant, swallowed by decisions already made without me. The first week passed in routines I had not been part of. Planning my grandchildren left for school, chattering about homework, school lunches, after-school activities. And I stayed in the basement, arranging my few belongings. I tried to place my small stack of documents on the table, next to the cabinet itself. $480 spent looked different. My documents, receipts, notes seemed out of place against walls, furniture, light. I had not chosen administrative or procedural moments began to confirm the loss before I even processed it. I noticed the schedule: breakfast at 7:10, out the door by 7:45, grocery deliveries every Friday, $260. My daughter walked through the basement telling me the heating was fixed at 19 degrees. I offered to help with the settings, thinking I might have some say, and she said it was already managed. The routine and the control were silent but complete. I began to write small reminders in my notebook: buy an extra blanket, consider a chair for the garden. These notes rested in my pocket untouched, almost ceremonial. Neighbors came to visit once, carrying a small cake priced at $22. They asked if I was staying temporarily. My daughter answered quickly, "She'll see how it goes." And the words hovered above me, quiet but heavy. I smiled politely, placing the plate on the kitchen counter. The dishwasher ran. I noted every detail: the digital panel for the heating, the receipt for the cake, the calendar with names in blue ink. None of it was mine. Procedural repetition, already deciding my place before I had a chance to understand. Each afternoon, the children returned from school, dropping their bags. Without a glance toward the basement, they spoke to their mother about homework, portals, lunch cards, needing a $75 top-up, sports fees totaling $180. My daughter listened, cutting carrots worth maybe $3.40. While I sat silently, I noticed each procedural step: the printing of school forms without my name, the dog I had not agreed to sleeping on the sofa I remembered from Australia. The losses were small each time, ordinary, repetitive, yet undeniable. Administrative or procedural moments continued to punctuate my days. My daughter asked me to sign witness forms for property assessment, stamp fee $45. The paper already prepared, I signed, without understanding why being a witness mattered more than being resident. Each signature another subtle confirmation of exclusion. The plumber was scheduled next Thursday between 10 and 2. Arrived, I kept the plumber waiting card on the table, a daily ritual of presence without agency. The dog adopted by my daughter sniffed through the basement I had funded, sniffed the tiles, the cabinet, the sofa, all things I had paid for, and then settled into the corner I had hoped would be mine. Adoption, 520 vaccination, 310 food subscription, 74 per month. I began to calculate small sums in my head: the Easter trip, 1,400, the sitter, 180, bank interest saved, 97 per month. By contributing 3,100, the totals were precise, but they could not translate into roll access or acknowledgement. The numbers confirmed what words could not. I began to speak to the walls quietly, because at least the walls listened without judgment. I told them about the neighbors, the plumber, the dog, the school forms, the receipts, the payments. I repeated the details every day, as if repetition could make my presence matter. No one questioned me or interrupted, which only reinforced the exclusion. Even small events became procedural reminders. During a school meeting in spring, the counselor thanked the parents' commitment while I stood behind them. My name was invisible on forms and discussion, even in presence. The basement renovation I had paid for was my only tangible evidence of belonging. Yet the space had been claimed by routine, schedules, decisions made without me. Every tile, every cabinet, every chair now belonged to someone else, and I observed them occupying the spaces I had imagined as mine. The calendar in the hallway advanced to 2025. Names in blue ink remained, and I was absent. Children's sneakers, 130 souvenirs, 60 dog food, 70 for bank interest, saved 97, all repeated as a rhythm that ignored me. Administrative or procedural confirmation of my place outside the household continued daily, unnoticed. I considered adjusting the curtain on the small basement window for 120, but paused. Perhaps waiting was the language of this house, the one I had invested in, but never joined. At night, I sat with the plumber waiting card. In my notebook of small calculations, I recounted every expense, every receipt, every procedural moment. The repetition was soothing and disturbing in its quiet insistence: my money, my time, my attention. None of it changed my presence. I tried to tell myself comfort could be bought, But the basement only confirmed category, not belonging. I had arrived, expecting a grandmother's place a role to inhabit in my grandchildren's lives. But routines, procedures, scheduling had quietly rewritten my position. My financial contribution was tangible, yet it did not translate into acknowledgement. I remained present, watching, calculating, repeating myself, to walls, to tiles, to the dog, to the absence of recognition. The loss was procedural, first financial, second emotional, only as it accumulated quietly. I had not yet understood it fully, but I could feel the distance expanding, the routines consolidating my absence. The house had already decided who belonged where, and I orbited the edges, speaking to walls, because they were the only receptive audience. Before I left Australia, my life was structured around routines I had made for myself, small, careful, yet meaningful in ways no one else seemed to notice. After my husband died, mornings began with tea. At 6, reading the newspaper, noting temperatures, checking the calendar. I watched the sunrise from my balcony, a quiet ritual marking the days I still had. Each task reinforced my sense of place, of belonging. Even if only to my own rhythms, I managed small expenses meticulously: groceries, medication, garden supplies. I remembered exactly what each week would cost: milk $8.50, bread $4.10. The monthly flower subscription $35. These numbers gave me structure, reassurance. I knew that when my daughter called, she was at work or traveling between Canada and the US, and I waited for her updates about the grandchildren. The calls were brief, often rushed, yet they punctuated my day, gave my existence within the family a faint but perceptible rhythm. The house in Brisbane smelled of jasmine in spring. I had the furniture arranged in ways that made sense to me: chairs angled to catch sunlight, the couch aligned to the radio, so I could listen to the classical station. At 11, my husband's chair remained in the corner. I would sit there in the afternoons, sometimes speaking aloud to him, sometimes just counting shadows on the wall. The small rituals of care, attention, order were my presence before anyone else required it. I still contributed to my daughter's household, remotely sending gifts, school supplies, or money for fees in Toronto and Vancouver. I imagined that my contributions kept me involved, that effort could maintain a bridge. Packages totaling maybe $350 would leave Australia weekly. I kept track of tracking numbers, arrival confirmations. Each successful delivery reinforced my imagined place in their lives. I believed I was useful, necessary in quiet ways. Meals in my home were prepared in patterns: breakfast at 7, toast, tea, occasionally fruit. I kept a journal of recipes, marked what worked for me and my husband, what could be shared with guests. I remembered birthdays, anniversaries, noting them in the calendar with colored ink, small symbols of attention. The house and routines were a quiet archive of care, a private ledger of presence. The neighbors on my street were familiar faces, greetings exchanged brief, meaningful. Whether the dogs walked the garden, I noticed how morning light fell on the pavement, which corner stayed in shadow longer. My world, modest in size, was full in observation. Predictable, structured. The loss of my husband had already shifted my internal landscape, but routines gave me continuity, a quiet affirmation that I mattered somewhere, even if only to myself. I spent hours planning the trip to Toronto, anticipating the basement, imagining the welcome from my grandchildren, envisioning a space partially mine, partially theirs. I wrote out detailed lists: clothing for the visit, receipts for basement, contributions, notes about school schedules. I imagined meals, routines, small moments with my daughter's family. I believed I would arrive and step smoothly into a role sustained in my mind through months of distance. Even when small things went awry: a delivery delayed, a grocery substitution, a payment miscalculated, I adapted, quietly logged it in my notebook. Continued, I considered these minor disturbances. This was my life just before arrival: careful, precise, built on observation. Numbers, small, habitual acts of attention. My place in the household, though distant, felt maintained. I also measured my own capacity: trips to friends' afternoon walks, short visits to the library, each scheduled. The clock guided me as much as memory. I knew when I left for Toronto, I would leave a carefully tended environment: plants, watered mailbox, cleared notes for the postman, neighbors aware of my absence, all procedural. Marking the boundaries of my world, I believed in preparation as a means of belonging. The financial ledger of my life was intact. I allocated $3,100 for the basement, spread over months of careful saving. I noted expenses, flights, estimated living costs, medical insurance for Canada, every number precise, grounded in expectation that investment would translate into access, presence, participation. The money was more than currency, it was a token of involvement. I counted the weeks until departure, imagined conversations with my grandchildren, remembering past visits, shared stories, meals. There were moments of reflection: afternoons in the sun, evenings with my journal, thinking of my husband, considering my role in the extended family. These moments reminded me life would continue, routines could maintain continuity. I could imagine the basement, the children laughing, my daughter cooking. My presence quietly acknowledged. My anticipation was calm but firm. I believed in the routines I had cultivated, the schedules, the preparation, even my social connections reinforced stability. Friends called, weekly letters arrived. I responded meticulously: birthdays, noted anniversaries, remembered small gifts, sent each gesture, recorded each delivery. Confirmed these ordinary repetitions affirmed my place within the world, within human connection. The house, the calendar, the financial records, the routines were a web of quiet relevance. I felt embedded even across oceans. I imagined arriving and being Welcome not in grand gestures, but in recognition of presence. I trusted that continuity counted on it as an anchor. Procedural moments were part of preparation, flights booked, airport transfers arranged, documents double-checked, contingencies, accounted for medical needs, school schedules, careful planning. Reinforced my anticipation of participation. I believed my place would be secure, my contribution, my involvement, my preparation would guarantee recognition. I reflected on what belonging meant. It was not grand, it was acknowledgement of routine's awareness, that my presence mattered even minimally. I counted days, weeks, remaining tasks, imagined the reunion. I believed by the last week in Australia, everything was organized, receipts, double-checked, tiles, 1,100 cabinets, 480 chair, 150 totaling 3,100 documents placed carefully in a folder labeled Toronto renovation. I imagined the conversation, the acknowledgement, everything was precise, orderly, measured. Life of quiet certainty before arrival. I had no sense yet that upon arriving the household would already have reorganized itself, routines, reassigned roles, claimed recognition. Withheld, the loss had not yet occurred. My anticipation, my preparation, my attention were intact. Everything felt normal, everything felt as it had always been. I trusted my procedures, my calculations, my planning. I trusted I had a role, that I would be seen, that I would be present in ways that mattered. This was life just before. Ordered, quiet, precise, entirely under my control. The first full week in Toronto settled into quiet routines. I had not chosen the basement. The space I had funded with $3,100 was already integrated into the household, and I watched it being used without notice of my presence each day. The repetition quietly confirmed the house had reorganized itself. I sat in the corner of the basement unpacking small belongings, placing documents beside the cabinet, trying to mark some trace of my investment. But my presence was invisible in daily activity. My grandchildren came home each afternoon at predictable times, dropping school bags in the hallway, walking past the basement stairs, not seeing me. I tried once to ask about their school day assignments, projects, and they continued talking to their mother, eyes fixed on screens, papers on the kitchen table. Procedural repetition. Reinforced exclusion, lunch money, 75 top-up, sports fees, 180 homework, portal updates, all processed without acknowledgement of me. I noted the numbers quietly in my notebook, aware of their utility and of the absence of recognition. Breakfast routines repeated without me. My daughter prepared cereal, toast, coffee, while I sat in the basement watching the light move across the tile floor. I had paid for the dog, walked up and down the stairs, ignored me entirely, slept on the sofa. Adoption, 520 vaccination, 310 food subscription, 74 per month. All accounted for, none of it connecting me to role or attention. I observed silently at school meetings. The pattern repeated. Teachers spoke to my daughter about performance assignments, upcoming events. My name was never mentioned, my presence unregistered. I signed forms as witness for property matters, stamp fee 45. These acknowledgments were hollow. They confirmed I existed as a signature, not as part of the household. Even small social gestures reflected repetition. A neighbor dropped by with a cake, $22, asked if I was staying temporarily. My daughter answered quickly, she'll see how it goes. I smiled politely, placing the plate on the counter as if my acknowledgement could substitute for acknowledgement received. Over the following days, neighbors repeated similar questions, each phrasing subtly reminding me my presence was provisional, contingent, secondary. Procedural repetition. Anchored exclusion, every detail repeated. Plumber cards still on the table, appointments never occurring. Digital heating panel fixed at 19 without consultation. Calendars with names in blue ink excluding me. The Easter trip, 1,400. Dog sitter, 180 arranged again. I watched while my daughter coordinated. I participated only peripherally, setting forms on counters, making small notes. These moments, ordinary, small, accumulated weight. I realized repetition was defining my place more than any conversation or instruction. Even meals repeated in patterns that ignored me. Dinner followed the same sequence, the dog on the sofa, children following their mother. Conversation flowing around me. I tried to ask questions, offer minor help. Do you need help with carrots? The reply was practical, brief. Already moving on, my efforts had no procedural consequence. The repetition confirmed invisibility. Weekends brought errands, small financial decisions, grocery deliveries, 260 dog food, 74 poster materials, 45 sneakers, 130, all recurring, all observed. I noted them, sometimes contributed minor sums, but the rhythm did not change. My financial participation became invisible. Procedural repetition showed me numbers alone, did not guarantee presence. The calendar turned slowly. Letters from school, digital notifications, invoices, reminders printed without my name. I filed them in the basement drawer beside receipts, tiles, 1,100 cabinets, 480 chair, 150 markers of investment, already absorbed without acknowledgement. Seeing this daily became a refrain. Procedural moments repeated. Socially, 2 neighbors continued to treat me as temporary. Packages arrived sorted without my input, even when I tried small interventions, adjusting a curtain, 120, checking a delivery schedule. My gestures were noted, but not required. Repetition reinforced invisibility. I began to anticipate each moment, the stairs, the dog, the children's chatter, emails. Each ordinary act became a reminder my role had been reassigned before I arrived. Micro decisions confirmed repeated exclusion. Placement, plumbing schedules, school pickup timing, grocery deliveries, all exact, all repeated. I recorded them trying to anchor myself in predictability. But repetition only highlighted absence, my contributions financial, procedural. Absorbed without acknowledgement, even my own routines failed to reinstate recognition. Tea at the same hour, neighborhood walks, personal schedules, they existed separate from the household rhythms that defined belonging. The repetition created a quiet undercurrent of anger. Did not name it, I observed, recorded, remained calm. The basement remained the silent stage, tiles shone under light chosen. Without me, cabinets held items organized by someone else. The chair I ordered moved to accommodate new routines. I noted everything in my notebook. Each repetition confirmed exclusion. Each procedural act emphasized absence. I spoke to walls, tiles, the dog, to mark my presence, however quietly. The children's routines repeated, homework, snacks, digital logins, my involvement peripheral. I calculated, took notes, tried to participate. Yet the cycles revealed the household had adapted to my absence. Neighbors repeated assumptions of temporary stay, repeated greetings. No acknowledgement of permanence, procedural cues, subtle, relentless. By the end of the second month, I saw the pattern, routine, repeated exclusion, repeated absence. Repeated in documents, in decisions, in observation. The household had settled into rhythms that ignored me. I recorded everything, numbers, times, schedules, receipts. Procedural evidence of investment and absence. The repetition itself became the measure of my place. I realized slowly. These moments had cumulative weight, each ordinary act, signing forms, watching the dog, counting invoices, confirmed my role had been reassigned without confrontation, without announcement. My contribution, my attention, my presence. And the 3,100 were absorbed into routines operating independently of me. I noticed, recorded, observed, and waited. The repetition did not end. I began to notice a small tension inside me, something I could feel, but not name. Every day I watched my daughter organize schedules, allocate chores, manage the children's routines without a word to me. I had expected my presence to matter, my contribution, the 3,100, to mean something, but it had already been absorbed into a world that did not include me. I felt invisible, and a quiet anger threaded through my observations, restrained. Because I did not know how or whether to act, I asked myself, not aloud, why each small task I attempted felt unnecessary. I reminded myself of the lists I had prepared before arriving, receipts, tiles, cabinets, the chair, dog care, school fees, every item accounted for meticulously. Yet when I offered to help, to coordinate, or even just to observe, my input was redundant. The plumber still did not arrive. The dog still claimed the space I had paid for. School forms printed without my name. Routines continued as if I were already gone. Procedural exclusion had become routine, and I orbited it silently. Sometimes when I tried to intervene, I hesitated mid-action. My hand would reach for the kettle, pause, then return it to the counter, thinking it was unnecessary or unwelcome. I noticed myself calculating whether any action would matter. If I act, will it change anything? If I remain, will I be noticed? The financial ledger sat in my mind like a silent weight. 3,100 for the basement, 150 for the garden chair, 408 for cabinets, 1,100 for tiles, numbers that should have meant influence or recognition, yet held no power over presence or acknowledgement. I watched my grandchildren in the evenings running past the basement stairs, laughing, talking to their mother about school, homework, sports. I tried once to ask about a project costing 45, a simple question. My words were absorbed into the rhythm of the house unnoticed. I felt a flicker of frustration, quickly subdued, because confrontation felt impossible. My anger remained quiet, threaded into observation instead of words. I began timing my presence. Breakfast, 7:10, 7:15, 7:20, grocery delivery arrivals, 260 every Friday, dog feeding schedules, school pickup, laundry routines, all procedural, all repeated without reference to me. The repetition was calming because I could predict it, and exasperating because predictability confirmed invisibility. I realized the conflict inside me was not dramatic. It was ordinary, quiet, procedural, yet unavoidable. Even financial offers became points of tension. I considered covering part of the internet, 95 per month, thinking it might grant recognition or agency. My daughter declined, saying, "Keep your money for yourself." I kept the 95 in my purse, the paper edge pressing against my fingers. Procedural acknowledgement denied, with no clear response available to me. The tension rooted itself in my desire to participate, and the reality that participation was not required. I noticed micro adjustments in my behavior. I spoke to walls, to tiles, to the dog. I repeated details. The plumber delay. The bank interest saved 97 per month. The Easter trip, 1,400. The dog sitter, 180. The repetition helped me track my own presence, yet underscored that no one else tracked me. My contributions, financial, temporal, had become invisible. The tension was procedural, a ledger, with no entries, even small. Social moments created conflict. A neighbor asked if I was staying temporarily. I smiled, placed the plate on the counter, walked away. I considered speaking, claiming permanence, but did not. The quiet anger restrained me. Procedural repetition reinforced invisibility. Yet the urge to push back hovered unspoken. I watched my daughter manage the household, school emails, printed lunch cards, topped up 75 sports fees, 180 digital portals, updated dog food, 74. I recorded everything in my notebook, trying to retain agency through observation. But the conflict remained unresolved. My investment, my effort, my attempts were irrelevant. I was present, But invisible, I noticed my own voice changing, speaking. Aloud to walls, to the dog, I rehearsed contributions that had no acknowledgement. The conflict persisted, subtle, constant. My frustration never rose to confrontation. It stayed, threaded through calculation, through procedural awareness. Instead of action, the house's repetition. Continued breakfast, school routines, dog schedules, emails, digital forms, all repeating without recognition. I felt myself orbiting the life I had expected to join. I recorded every detail, timed every arrival, every movement. The ledger of contribution, monetary, temporal, held no influence. The conflict was internal. How to exist, remain calm, and still feel present when routines ignored me. At night, I reviewed receipts, tiles, 1,100 cabinets, 480 chair, 150 dog. Adoption, 520 vaccination, 310 Easter trip, 1,400 bank interest. Saved 97 per month. I traced the paper edges with my fingers, procedural evidence of effort, presence, contribution. Yet absent from recognition, I repeated it quietly. The numbers do not guarantee role. The numbers do not guarantee presence. The numbers do not guarantee acknowledgement. I understood the conflict was not something I could confront directly. Speaking might provoke disagreement. Asking to be acknowledged might feel forced. I could not reclaim the tiles, the cabinet, the chair, or the authority absorbed into routines that ignored me. My presence existed alongside the rhythm, not within it. Quiet anger followed me through every observation, restrained, persistent. I began anticipating procedural moments before they occurred. School routines, dog movements, grocery deliveries, emails, plumbing, delays. Observation became a way to maintain presence, to navigate an invisible boundary. Yet anticipation did not resolve the tension. It only highlighted the distance between expectation and exclusion. Every repeated moment confirmed the conflict. My presence necessary only in theory, my investment meaningful only as data. My place quietly shifted. I had no words to name it, yet I felt it in every repeated act, every unnoticed contribution, every routine I observed without inclusion. The internal conflict became a rhythm of its own, quiet observation, careful calculation, subtle resentment, restrained in thought, procedural awareness replacing agency. By the end of this period, I understood this conflict would accompany every action, every observation, every procedural engagement. The 3,100, the planning, the anticipation, the preparation, all collided with invisibility. I continued to orbit, quiet, present, calculating. Restrained, unresolved, the tension remained ordinary, familiar, entirely procedural, entirely consuming. It was one of those afternoons when the sunlight hit the basement just right, the tiles reflecting the light I had chosen months ago. I noticed the dog stretched across the sofa. The cushions I had paid for slightly indented from use. My daughter moved quickly through the kitchen, her phone in hand. My grandchildren passed by, chatting, laughing, without a glance in my direction. And in that precise repetition, I understood something quietly, fully, without words. The 3,100, the careful list, the plan. Preparation, none of it had guaranteed presence, acknowledgement, or role. The routines, the schedules, the procedural rhythm of the household had absorbed everything and erased intention. I was present physically, yet absent from influence, from recognition, from procedural authority. I traced the receipts again, tiles, 1,100 cabinets, 480 chair, 150 dog. Adoption, 520 vaccination, 310 monthly subscriptions, 74 each. Number represented care, anticipation, effort. Yet watching the house, I understood they had no effect on how I was treated. Repeated exclusion, the routines, the chatter, the focus on management, all confirmed my invisible status. I realized this invisibility had been accumulating long before arrival. Emails without my name, school forms, neighbors assuming temporary presence. At first I had dismissed them as oversight, small anomalies. But together, repeated, ordinary, they formed a pattern. My role had been redefined. Without my awareness, I caught myself adjusting the curtain 120 and paused mid-action. My hands hovered. I looked at the sofa, the tiles, the dog, and I realized the effort was meaningless. The physical labor, the small acts, the careful attention had been absorbed without acknowledgement. My influence dissolved, my presence invisible. The realization extended to relationships. My daughter was courteous, the children polite. But courtesy was not participation. Politeness was not inclusion. My attempts to join conversations, decisions, daily routines had no effect. Observation was now my role. Participation existed only in memory. And in my notebook, even small gestures no longer mattered. The dog on the chair, the children running past, the printed forms, each repeated without reference to me. The loss of role, the absorption, the invisibility became undeniable, not sudden, not dramatic, just steady. I spoke to the walls again about the plumber, the bank interest saved 97 per month, the Easter trip 1,400, the dog sitter 180. The repetition was no longer habit, it was a marker, a reminder that contribution existed even if unrecognized. Each procedural act confirmed absence, each observation anchored reality. I did not feel anger at first, not loud, not visible, just understanding, quiet, procedural, meticulous. My place had been reassigned, my investment absorbed without acknowledgement. I observed, noted, recorded, and in recording maintained presence. By the end of the afternoon, I noticed a shift. Instead of inserting myself, I stepped aside slightly. I repeated details, counted tiles, noted cabinets, watched the dog, listened to chatter, and allowed myself to register invisibility fully. The patterns repeated, ordinary, procedural, spoke clearly. My imagined role Did not exist. My presence was not recognized. My influence procedural, only not relational. I returned to my notebook, recorded everything: contributions, routines, repetitions, the act of writing. Became my anchor. It allowed me to inhabit the space, maintain order, assert presence quietly. The realization was cumulative. Without confrontation, I existed yet had been removed from recognition. The house continued: meals, school, routines, dog care, emails, forms. Each repetition confirmed the truth. Expectations had been overwrit. Procedural repetition was the language of exclusion. The realization settled, persistent, contained. I would have to live alongside this reality, observe, record, navigate materially. Present, relationally absent. My contribution, intact. My planning complete. My attention, devoted yet absorbed. The quiet realization solidified. The house, the schedules, the routines had already decided my place. I was present, but invisible. After weeks of observation, I understood that speaking up, insisting, trying to redirect routines would not change anything. The house, the schedules, the repeated procedural decisions had already absorbed the 3,100. My planning, my anticipated role. One afternoon, I sat quietly in the basement, tracing the edge of the chair I had purchased, and I decided my participation would take a different form. It was not dramatic. I did not plan confrontation. I did not intend to make anyone aware of the decision. I chose presence without expectation, contribution without acknowledgement. I would continue to pay attention, to record, to act quietly, but I would not allow my dignity to be eroded by repeated invisibility. The financial investment, the careful list, the preparation remained mine, even if absorbed into routine. I began small. I organized documents, receipts, in a way that made sense to me. Tiles, 1,100 cabinets, 480 chair, 150 dog adoption, 520 vaccination, 310, all accounted for, all recorded. I placed them on the small table in the basement, visible only to myself. No one noticed. That was enough. I adjusted my daily movements. I attended routines: breakfast, school, pickups, dog care, emails, digital forms, but I no longer inserted myself into decisions. I observed, recorded. Let the household operate independently. Procedural repetition continued, but my internal approach shifted. Invisibility would no longer erase my sense of self. Small gestures became deliberate. Tea at the same hour each afternoon, walks through the neighborhood, counting minor expenses, repeating details. The plumber delay, the bank interest saved $97 per month. Speaking to wall, dog to the tiles. These acts were not pointless. They preserved me. Grocery deliveries, 260 sorted without me. I did not intervene. Children ran past, laughing, ignoring me. I recorded it quietly. The repetition no longer surprised me. It confirmed the clarity of my decision. I would act consistently, deliberately, without seeking validation. Financial contribution shifted meaning. The 3,100 was not wasted. Even if unrecognized, it marked a space, a record, a quiet assertion. I stopped imagining recognition would follow. Influence would remain procedural, invisible. I maintained records meticulously, not for anyone else, for myself. Procedural observation became intentional. Breakfast times, school pickups, dog movements, my daughter's schedules, each repetition evidence of presence, not influence. The ledger was enough. Interactions with the children shifted. I still asked simple questions, offered minor help, but expected nothing. Answers, acknowledgement. The house continued. Independently, I observed and recorded. Neighbors' questions about permanence became background. I smiled, placed items on counters, returned to my routines. The quiet decision to exist without expectation became my method. By the end of the week, the pattern was clear. I would maintain presence, track contributions, observe repetition, but expect nothing. My role would exist silently alongside the household, entirely on my terms. There was no triumph, no relief, only calm, measured, deliberate. The quiet anger remained restrained, a companion to careful calculation, rather than action. Each day, as routines repeated, I felt assurance in my method. Observation, recording, presence without expectation became ritual. I was still invisible, still orbiting, still unacknowledged, but the decision had been made. I would not allow procedural exclusion to erode my self-regard. My boundaries, my practices, my quiet survival were now chosen. The first consequence appeared quickly. I no longer tried to insert myself into routines: breakfast, school drop-offs, dog care, emails, digital forms. I observed, recorded, acted only when necessary. The household continued unchanged, but I was no longer frustrated in the moment. I was deliberate, restrained, contained. My financial contributions now lived only in my notebook: 3,100. For the basement, 150. For the chair, 480. For cabinets, 1,100. For tiles, dog adoption, 520. Vaccination, 310. Bank interest saved $97 per month. Easter trip, 1,400. All of it concrete, yet powerless to alter attention or acknowledgement. The consequence was a private ledger of dignity. Daily repetition reinforced the pattern. My daughter handled school forms, lunch cards, 75 sports fees, 180 procedural tasks without consulting me. I stayed at the margins, observing, recording, occasionally signing. When asked, presence confirmed. Influence absent. I noticed a shift inside myself. Disappointment no longer arrived with anxiety. I recorded facts. Instead, if the dog lay on the sofa, I let it be. If the children ran past laughing, I noted it and moved on. Observation became structure, endurance. The consequence was internalized presence, sustained, unseen social interactions. Reflected the same. Neighbors asked if I was visiting. I smiled, placed items on counters, returned to the basement. The question no longer provoked me anger, remained quiet threaded beneath. Observation contained procedural repetition, continued breakfast emails, dog care forms, chores. I recorded them, watched management function independently. The repetition confirmed the reality I had chosen: present, but invisible financial contribution. Once a promise, now an anchor, the 3,100 no longer represented access or influence. It was evidence of intention, care, foresight, contained within me. Minor interactions produced predictable results: grocery deliveries, 260 sorted without me, school fees, dog food subscriptions. Unchanged, I observed and moved on. The consequence was quiet agency, entirely internal: adjusting the curtain, making tea, walking the neighborhood, speaking to walls. All became rituals. I was attentive, deliberate, unacknowledged, but intact by the end of the month. The pattern was undeniable. The household continued unaffected. Procedural repetition absorbed everything: my actions, self-contained, my role, observation, recording, internal acknowledgement. The consequence of my decision was survival, quiet, procedural, entirely under my control. I sat at the basement table counting tiles: 1,100 cabinets, 480 chair, 150 dog adoption, 520 vaccination, 310 minor expenses, all noted. Each repetition confirmed absence, each record confirmed dignity. I was invisible yet whole, overlooked, yet attentive. Consequences existed entirely within observation, without confrontation, without recognition. The repetition remained, and I endured deliberately, quietly, precisely. Part 8 months. Past. The routines continued without interruption: breakfast, school forms, dog care, emails, grocery deliveries, all repeated exactly as before. Procedural unchanged. I no longer tried to insert myself, no longer hoped for acknowledgement, no longer imagined my contribution would grant influence. I observed, recorded, existed quietly. The 3,100, the cap, 180, the tiles, 1,100, the chair, 150 dog adoption, 520 vaccination, 310 bank interest, 97 per month, all remained tangible evidence of presence. Yet none of it shifted routines or attention. I kept the ledger, meticulous, knowing it was my measure of agency and dignity. I settled fully into the pattern I had chosen: speaking to walls, to the dog, counting tiles, tracing receipts, became ritual. Presence without expectation. Observation replaced influence, recording replaced acknowledgement, repetition confirmed invisibility. My internal structure preserved me. The children continued past, laughing, talking to their mother, never noticing my interventions. The dog claimed the sofa. My daughter's management proceeded independently. I watched, recorded, participated only when required. Physical presence, procedural influence, invisible role. Neighbors continued to assume I was temporary. I smiled, answered minimally, returned to the basement. The questions no longer stirred me. Anger remained quiet, contained, threaded through calculation. Even reminders of contribution were absorbed silently. The basement, the furniture, the dog, the expenses, all functioned without reference to me. I acknowledged them internally, tracing each receipt, each repeated act. Presence existed only in observation. Expectation dissolved. Morning light through basement windows, the dog shifting, children's footsteps overhead confirmed the same truth. Invisibility, I no longer sought recognition or influence. The household operated independently. I existed alongside it, attentive, deliberate, contained my routines. Once preparation, now endurance. Tea at 3 notes in my notebook. Procedural observation, counting, tracing, the planning, the anticipation. The contribution remained anchors. The outside world recognized nothing. My ledger remained precise. I did not speak of the loss or explain it. The money, the basement, the dog, the children's schedules, all absorbed quietly my actions. Deliberate, self-contained observation replaced engagement, record replaced recognition, endurance replaced expectation. Evenings were procedural, reviewing receipts, tiles, 1,100 cabinets, 480 chair, 150 dog adoption, 520 vaccination, 310 each. Repetition confirmed absence externally, presence internally. I accepted fully the household would continue. Recognition would not arrive. Routines would repeat. My role was observation. Calculation, internal acknowledgement, procedural repetition defined absence. I persisted quietly, deliberately, without expectation. By the end of the year, this rhythm was complete. Every repeated act could be traced: breakfast, school forms, dog care, expenses, schedules. I recorded them all: present, invisible, attentive. Self-contained, the basement, the planning, the anticipation, all remained internal proof of participation. Unacknowledged, maintained. I understood my presence mattered only to me. My role had been reassigned: influence, recognition, acknowledgement, absorbed into routine. Yet I remained deliberate, observant, enduring the loss. Financial, relational, had been absorbed without confrontation. But I was still here, recording, counting, tracing, existing in quiet survival, in subtle assertion, in careful endurance, in invisible presence.